All right, so are you ready to dive into a world where truth isn't always what it seems?
A world where opposites attract.
And where a recipe for mince pie might just be a metaphor for spiritual transformation?
Oh, this sounds intriguing.
It is. We're taking on Aleister Crowley's Konx. It's a collection of essays and stories and poems.
Exploring the mystical side of reality.
Exactly. Now, I know Crowley can be, well, a lot, even for seasoned deep divers like ourselves.
Yeah, he's not exactly known for simplicity.
So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to try to sift through all that dense symbolism,
And see if we can extract some golden nuggets of insight.
decode it all for our listeners.
Basically, we're your personal Crowley decoders.
Exactly. And speaking of decoding, Crowley doesn't exactly make it easy, does he?
No, not really. He's not big on spoon-feeding you answers.
Right from the start, he throws a curveball with his writing style.
He compares trying to explain complex mystical ideas to someone who isn't ready to understand.
To trying to teach spherical trigonometry to the inhabitants of Flatland.
Oh, that's a good one. Flatland, for those who haven't encountered it.
It's a two-dimensional world, so the beings there can only perceive length and width.
They simply can't grasp the concept of a sphere.
So imagine trying to explain, I don't know, height or depth to someone who's never experienced anything beyond length and width.
Mind-boggling.
Right, that's kind of what Crowley is getting at here.
He's saying there are certain truths, especially those mystical truths, that can't be conveyed through simple explanations.
You can't just lay it all out in a neat little package.
Exactly.
So instead, he uses this really dense, almost cryptic language
Full of symbolism.
to try and point you towards the truths that are, well, beyond our usual logical understanding.
You know, I think that's one of the things that makes Konx so fascinating, though.
It's like he's trying to shake up your whole perception of reality.
Make you question your assumptions about how the world works.
Yeah, like he's saying, hey, wake up. There's more to this than you realize. Okay, let's try to unpack that a bit further. One of the things that really struck me was Crowley's argument that truth isn't this simple binary, you know?
It's not just A or not A.
Right. He believes it can exist outside of our usual categories.
So how do we even begin to grasp that?
Well, he uses the example of asking whether virtue is green or not green.
What?
It sounds strange, right? But he points out that virtue has nothing to do with color.
It's outside that entire framework.
You can't categorize it like that.
It's a completely different category of concept.
It really made me think, we're so used to categorizing things, putting them in these neat little boxes.
But what if truth, especially spiritual truth, just doesn't fit in those boxes?
What if it requires a whole different way of thinking? A way of thinking that transcends the limits of logic and language.
Right, because if you try to force it into those boxes, you're going to miss the point entirely.
And this actually connects to all sorts of modern philosophical debates.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like the nature of consciousness.
Or even artificial intelligence. Can we truly define these concepts using our current categories? Or do they require us to expand our understanding of what's even possible?
Crowley would say, you have to go beyond the confines of traditional thought.
To even begin to grapple with those questions.
And that's where his idea of balancing opposites comes in, I think.
Right. He believed that transcending duality, moving beyond those either categories,
Comes from mastering both sides of an apparent conflict.
it's not about choosing one over the other.
It's about finding that balance.
Think of it like that charioteer in the tarot.
Driving a chariot pulled by two sphinxes, one black and one white.
You need to control both of those forces.
Not just one.
And you know what? This idea really resonated with me because it's not about eliminating one side or the other. It's about finding that delicate balance.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Crowley actually uses the example of the hands and feet being similar but not interchangeable in our three-dimensional world.
So they serve different purposes, but they work together.
But then he asks, what if in a higher dimension they could coincide?
It's like he's suggesting there's a level of understanding where those seemingly opposite forces can actually merge.
And become one.
Fascinating.
Okay, so we've got this idea of truth being elusive, the importance of balancing opposites.
Now, where do we go from here?
Well, let's see how this plays out in one of Crowley's stories. We're going to dive into the wake world. He describes it as an allegory.
An allegory, so like a symbolic journey.
Through the stages of spiritual development. Think of it like, I don't know, like a dreamlike adventure.
A dreamlike adventure through a palace filled with hidden meanings.
You got it. And you're going to encounter some pretty intriguing characters and symbols along the way.
Like the fairy prince.
The protagonist describes him as this dark boy with a mouth redder than roses.
So he's both beautiful and dangerous.
hinting at the complexities of that whole spiritual transformation process.
It's never a straightforward path.
And then there's that image of the meadow. I love this image. It's a beautiful meadow, very serene. But it's surrounded by a snake eating its own tail.
Oh yeah, classic symbol.
It appears right at the start of the story and kind of sets the stage for the whole journey.
And we all know what the snake eating its own tail represents.
The cyclical nature of life and death.
Endings and beginnings.
But why do you think Crowley chose to place it here at the very beginning of this spiritual journey?
I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? Maybe he's reminding us that death and rebirth are integral parts of spiritual growth.
You can't have one without the other.
It's like that saying, you have to die before you can truly live.
Right. So even in this idyllic meadow, there's this reminder of the constant cycle of change.
The duality is woven into the very fabric of existence,
We can't escape it.
no matter how hard we try.
And maybe we shouldn't try to escape it. Maybe that's part of the lesson here.
Maybe it's about embracing the duality, finding that balance between the opposing forces.
So we're already seeing that idea of duality, of balancing opposites, woven into the very fabric of the story.
It's like the foundation upon which everything else is built.
And it's not just in the symbols and the characters.
It's in the structure of the story itself.
Even the architecture of the palace is designed to challenge our perceptions.
Each house represents a different stage of spiritual development.
But their arrangement and layout defy conventional logic.
They're interconnected in ways that make you question the linear progression of spiritual growth.
It's like he's saying that there's no one-size-fits-all path to enlightenment.
Each individual's journey is unique and full of unexpected twists and turns.
There's no right or wrong way to do it.
It's all about finding your own path.
And then there's that ring with the secret symbols, INRI and TARO.
Oh, I love how he just throws those in there without any explanation.
The protagonist encounters it just as she's about to embark on her journey.
It's like he's giving her and us a set of tools.
But he's not telling us how to use them.
We have to figure that out for ourselves.
And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's about finding our own personal meaning in these symbols, our own unique keys to unlock the mysteries of the spiritual path.
It's like he's saying, here's a map, but you have to chart your own course.
Exactly. As this line, the greater the adept, the more truthful. Should he in error speak, the more must he appear a liar to those of his fellows who hear his voice.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
But it's so profound, right? It's like he's saying that the deeper your understanding, the more difficult it becomes to communicate it to those who haven't reached that same level of awareness.
It's like trying to explain quantum physics to someone who's only ever studied basic Newtonian mechanics.
Exactly. The concepts are so radically different that the explanation might just sound like gibberish.
So it's not that the adept is intentionally trying to deceive anyone.
It's about the inherent limitations of trying to communicate experiences and knowledge that are outside the realm of ordinary understanding.
They're speaking a different language.
A language that most people just aren't fluent in.
Yet.
Right. And he gives this great example in YOGAPUNX. He talks about a neophyte asking an adept about elemental spirits.
Those beings associated with the elements.
Like fire, water, earth, and air.
Right. So what happens?
Well, depending on the adept's perspective, the answer could be both true and false simultaneously.
Wait, how can something be both true and false at the same time?
It's about the listener's level of understanding. To someone who believes in a very literal interpretation of elemental spirits, the adept's answer might seem like a lie.
Because they're looking for a concrete, straightforward explanation.
But to someone who understands the symbolic nature of those concepts, the adept's answer might reveal a profound truth.
Because they're able to see beyond the literal meaning.
So the truth, in a way, is relative to the listener's perspective.
Their level of awareness.
And that brings us to this whole idea of esoteric knowledge.
Truths that are only accessible to those who have gone through the necessary spiritual work and transformation.
It's not about secrecy for the sake of secrecy.
It's about recognizing that certain truths can only be grasped through direct experience.
You can't just read about it in a book.
You have to live it
You have to go through the fire yourself.
and emerge transformed on the other side.
Exactly. And that's where Crowley's work can be both challenging and rewarding.
It pushes you to expand your understanding of what's possible
To look beyond the surface of things.
and to find your own truth.
Now, I know all this might sound a bit heavy and serious.
Like we're just diving into these deep philosophical concepts.
Well, there's definitely a lot of that in YOGAPUNX.
There's also a lighter side to Crowley.
He definitely had a sense of humor.
Oh, absolutely. He could be quite witty,
And playful.
especially when he was poking fun at those he considered hypocrites or fools.
Right. And we see this playful side of him in his satirical dialogue, Aleister.
Oh, yeah, Ollie Sloper. That's a good one.
It's like a philosophical comedy routine,
Where he takes aim at various religious and philosophical ideas.
using wit and wordplay to deconstruct them.
He's not afraid to challenge anyone or anything.
He creates these two characters, Bones and Bully,
Who are basically having a philosophical pub crawl.
debating everything from the meaning of life to the definition of opposites.
It's like listening to two brilliant but slightly tipsy philosophers arguing in a pub.
I love that image.
It's so Crowley.
And, even though he's using humor and satire, he's actually raising some really profound questions.
Like, what is truth? What are the limits of reason?
And how do we even know what we know?
It's mind-blowing stuff.
One of my favorite lines is when Bones, while discussing the opposite of truth, declares, "A crooked line is not the contradictory of a straight one, because both curves and corners exclude the straight line."
So even our concept of opposites is flawed.
Limited.
There's always something beyond those simplistic categories.
And I think that's one of the key takeaways from Ali Sloper, even though it's presented in this humorous way.
It's like he's saying, don't take anything for granted, even your most basic assumptions.
Question everything.
And don't be afraid to laugh at the absurdity of it all.
Exactly. Because sometimes laughter is the best way to deal with the complexities of existence.
It helps to lighten the mood.
And it can also open our minds to new possibilities.
So even in his satire, Crowley is challenging us to think differently.
To see the world from a new perspective.
And to find our own truth amidst the chaos.
Now, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive,
Which will be.
we're going to explore how all these ideas we've been discussing, truth, duality, symbolism, the challenges of communication,
Play out in Crowley's stories.
especially in the wake world.
Oh, I can't wait to dive back into that.
Me too. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered so far.
We've explored Crowley's unique approach to truth.
His emphasis on balancing those opposing forces within ourselves.
And his playful use of language and symbolism.
So as you continue to explore Konx Unpacks, I encourage you to keep these key concepts in mind. Look for those hidden meanings, question those seemingly straightforward statements, and don't be afraid to embrace the paradox and the absurdity.
It's a wild ride, but it's worth it.
Crowley's work is all about challenging your perceptions,
Expanding your understanding of what's possible.
both in the realm of spirituality and in life itself.
So buckle up and enjoy the journey. Welcome back to our deep dive into Crowley's Konx Unpacks.
We've been kind of unpacking all these ideas,
About truth being more than just A or B or black and white.
Yeah, exactly. And about balancing those seemingly opposing forces within ourselves.
The light and shadow, the masculine and feminine, all of that.
And then his love for symbolism, which is like a whole other layer on top of everything.
Right, so we've covered a lot of ground.
But I'm curious to see how all these ideas actually come together in his stories.
Well, you remember the wake world we were discussing? It's more than just a bunch of weird dream imagery.
Right, like it's not just randomness.
No. Crowley very deliberately uses these contrasting symbols
Oh, so it's all intentional.
to highlight the stages of spiritual development, like a roadmap.
A roadmap. Okay, I like
But
that.
maybe one drawn by, like, Salvador Dali.
Okay, so it's a trippy roadmap. But give me an example. What kind of symbols are we talking about?
Think back to that image of the fairy prince, the dark boy, with a mouth redder than roses.
Oh, yeah, he was like simultaneously attractive and kind of creepy.
He's both innocent and dangerous, beautiful and unsettling.
And that's supposed to be the essence of transformation.
Exactly. It's about merging those seemingly opposite qualities.
To reach a higher level of understanding.
So you're not trying to eliminate one or the other.
It's about integrating them, bringing them together.
Yeah, finding that balance.
So those contrasting images are actually reflecting that inner struggle.
That integration of our light and shadow sides.
Right, we're not just talking about external symbols.
This is about what's happening inside us.
It's like those symbols are a mirror reflecting our own inner landscape.
Precisely. And it's not just in the characters. Look at the setting itself.
You mean the meadow?
Yeah, you've got this beautiful, peaceful meadow.
A place of tranquility.
But it's surrounded by that snake eating its own tail.
Oh yeah, the Ouroboros. We talked about that.
And it's a reminder that even in paradise, even in those moments of peace and beauty,
There's a cycle of death and rebirth. You can't escape it.
it's woven into the very fabric of existence.
You know what? That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like how we often try to push away those darker, less desirable parts of ourselves.
But maybe that's not the answer.
Maybe it's about acknowledging them, integrating them,
To become more whole.
to accept the fullness of who we are, both the light and the shadow.
That's one of the core tenets of Crowley's philosophy.
So it's not about being perfect or always positive.
No, it's about embracing the totality of your being.
The good, the bad, and everything in between.
Trying to suppress one side of the duality just leads to imbalance.
And imbalance leads to all sorts of problems.
You need both, the light and the shadow, to truly walk the path of spiritual growth. To evolve, really.
That reminds me of that image of the charioteer.
Oh, you mean the one from the tarot?
Yeah, driving the chariot pulled by the two sphinxes, the black and white ones.
It's a classic image of duality.
And it's not about getting rid of one of those sphinxes. It's about learning to control both of them.
To harness their power.
And that's where the real skill lies.
It's like being a master chef who can combine all sorts of different ingredients.
To create something truly delicious.
Crowley was really drawn to that tarot card.
He must have seen it as a powerful metaphor.
It perfectly encapsulates his idea of mastering those opposing forces within ourselves.
And he believed that's where true spiritual power lies.
Not in denying one side or the other,
but in finding that delicate balance.
And wielding it with skill and precision.
Now, we've been focusing a lot on the stories and the symbolism.
The imagery and the metaphors.
But Crowley also delves into some pretty heavy philosophical ideas in Konx Unpacks.
Oh yeah, he gets pretty deep at times.
Especially when it comes to the nature of truth.
And he's not afraid to use humor to make his point.
Oh, absolutely. Remember Aleister?
Oh yeah, his satirical dialogue. That was a wild ride.
It's like he took all these serious philosophical ideas and turned them into a stand-up comedy routine.
He was a master of satire.
And wordplay.
He creates these two characters, Bones and Bully, who are basically having a philosophical pub crawl.
Debating everything under the sun.
From the meaning of life to the definition of opposites.
And it's hilarious.
But also thought-provoking.
Yeah, you're laughing, but then you're like, wait a minute, he's making a really good point here.
It's like he's sneakily slipping in these profound insights amidst all the jokes and puns.
So what are some of the things they're actually arguing about?
Well, at one point, Bones says, a crooked line is not the contradictory of a straight one because both curves and corners exclude the straight line.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
But think about it. He's saying that even our understanding of opposites is flawed.
It's limited.
There's always something beyond those simplistic categories.
There's always more to the story than meets the eye.
And that's a recurring theme in Crowley's work.
He's constantly challenging us to look deeper.
To question our assumptions.
And to expand our awareness.
So even in his most humorous writings, there's a profound message.
Don't take things at face value.
Question everything.
And be open to new ways of seeing the world.
Because the truth, if there is such a thing,
might be a lot more complex and nuanced than we initially thought.
And a lot funnier.
Now, we've been talking a lot about Aleister, which is this satirical piece.
But Crowley also uses humor in some of his more serious writings.
Like in his essay, The Stone of the Philosophers.
Oh yeah, that one's packed with symbolism and allegory.
It's about this group of men who are all seeking spiritual enlightenment.
But they're all coming at it from very different perspectives.
You got Basil, who's actually seen God and died.
Died and come back to life.
So he's got this whole otherworldly perspective.
Like he's not bound by the limitations of ordinary human perception anymore.
And then there's the doctor, who's been driven mad by studying madness.
Talk about irony.
And the scholar, whose vast knowledge has actually brought him to the brink of insanity.
It's like they're all cautionary tales.
About the dangers and challenges of the spiritual path.
Because it's not all rainbows and butterflies.
Crowley was very clear about that.
He believed that true spiritual growth requires confronting those darker aspects of ourselves.
The things we'd rather ignore or sweep under the rug.
Our fears, our doubts, our shadow side.
And his characters in The Stone of the Philosophers are like these stark reminders.
Of the potential pitfalls along the way.
But there's also beauty in their stories, isn't there?
Absolutely. Each of them, despite their struggles, represents a unique way of engaging with the mysteries of existence.
They're all trying to make sense of this crazy thing we call life.
And they're all willing to go to extremes to find the truth.
And that's what makes them so compelling.
Even if we don't always agree with their methods.
Or their conclusions.
But Crowley wasn't saying that there's only one right way to seek enlightenment.
He was more interested in exploring the different paths.
The different ways of seeing and experiencing the world.
And ultimately, I think he was emphasizing the importance of individual experience.
That true understanding can't always be conveyed through words or dogma.
It has to be lived.
Experienced firsthand.
There's this moment in The Stone of the Philosophers where he compares trying to explain a mystical experience to describing the beauty of a sunset.
You can use all the words in the world.
But you'll never truly capture the essence of it.
Because it's something that has to be felt, experienced directly.
It's like those moments that touch us on such a deep level that language just falls short.
And Crowley seems to be saying that those ineffable experiences are at the heart of spiritual growth. It's not about accumulating knowledge or following a set of rules.
It's about opening yourself to the mystery.
And allowing yourself to be transformed by it.
You know, we've talked about Crowley's use of symbols throughout Konx, YOGAPUNX.
The snake, the fairy prince, all of that.
But I'm curious to know how he actually used symbols in his own spiritual practice. Didn't he create his own system of magic?
He did. It's called thelema.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Which is Greek for will.
So it's all about using your will to create change.
Exactly. And symbolism plays a huge role in thelema.
So it's not just about interpreting symbols intellectually.
It's about actively engaging with them.
Using them as tools for spiritual growth.
Crowley believed that by working with specific symbols, you could tap into powerful forces and energies.
And ultimately transform yourself.
It's like alchemy.
Turning lead into gold.
Exactly. He saw symbols as keys.
Unlocking hidden dimensions of reality.
And he developed these elaborate rituals and practices.
Designed to access those dimensions.
So it wasn't just theory for him. He put it into practice in a very concrete way.
He was a magician in the truest sense of the word. Now, one of the most interesting examples of this is in his story, The Devil's Conversion.
Which is actually a story within a story. It's embedded within the Stone of the Philosophers.
Right. It's about this guy who encounters the devil.
In the Scottish wilderness, no less.
Talk about a setting for a spiritual showdown.
And through his sheer willpower, he actually converts the devil to his side.
Wait, what? The devil gets converted? That's not how the story usually goes.
Right. But Crowley was never one for conventional narratives.
He always liked to shake things up.
And I think there's a deeper meaning here.
Like maybe it's not meant to be taken literally?
He's using the figure of the devil to represent those aspects of ourselves.
For shadow side.
The things that tempt us away from our higher purpose.
Our fears, our doubts, our negative tendencies.
So the devil's conversion represents the possibility of integrating those shadow elements.
Transforming them into something positive.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even those parts of ourselves that we might consider evil or negative
can be harnessed and used for good.
They're not something to be feared or rejected.
But to be understood and integrated.
It's like he's saying that true spiritual power doesn't come from denying our darkness.
But from embracing it, working with it.
And ultimately transcending it.
Now, in contrast to the devil's conversion, there's another story within the Stone of the Philosophers called The Disappointed Artist.
Oh, yeah, that one's pretty intense.
It explores the darker side of creativity and the pursuit of beauty.
It's about this Italian prince who becomes obsessed with capturing the essence of beauty.
In his art.
But his quest becomes twisted and destructive.
So it's a cautionary tale.
About the dangers of becoming too attached to our ideals.
Of losing sight of the bigger picture.
And of the potential for beauty.
Even spiritual beauty.
To become a double-edged sword.
Right. It can be both inspiring and destructive.
If it's not balanced with other qualities.
Like compassion and empathy.
The prince in the story is so fixated on his own vision of perfection.
That he's willing to harm others to achieve it.
Which is obviously not a good thing.
So Crowley seems to be reminding us that balance is key.
Even in our creative endeavors.
We need to be mindful of the potential for our passions to become destructive.
If they're not tempered with wisdom and compassion.
That brings us back to that central theme of Konx YOGAPUNX.
The importance of balancing those opposing forces within ourselves.
To find that middle path.
The path of harmony and integration.
And you know, there's one more character in the Stone of the Philosophers that I think offers a really interesting perspective on all this.
Which one is that?
Basil.
Oh yeah, Basil, the guy who died and came back.
After seeing God.
Yeah, he's a bit of an enigma.
It's almost like he's not even bound by the limitations of ordinary human perception anymore.
He's seen beyond the veil.
And he speaks with this kind of detached wisdom.
That's both fascinating and unsettling.
He's no longer interested in the petty concerns of everyday life.
He's focused on those deeper truths that most of us can only glimpse.
It's like he represents a level of spiritual attainment that most of us can only dream of.
He's reached a state of transcendence.
But even in his detached state, there's a sense of compassion in his words.
He's not judging the others for their struggles.
He's simply offering his unique perspective on the nature of reality.
From a vantage point that most of us can't even comprehend.
It's almost as if he's embodying that idea of balancing opposites.
Of integrating the light and shadow within himself to reach a higher state of being
He's gone beyond the duality.
and found that place of unity.
And I think that's ultimately what Crowley is pointing towards in all of his work.
That there's a way to transcend the limitations of our ordinary perception
To find that place of balance and harmony within ourselves.
and to realize our full potential as human beings.
And that's a pretty inspiring message, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It gives me hope.
Me too. It reminds me that even amidst all the chaos and uncertainty of life,
There's a path forward.
a path to greater understanding, wisdom, and compassion,
And that's a path worth pursuing.
no matter how challenging it might be. Welcome back to our deep dive into YOGAPUNX.
We've been trying to unpack some of Crowley's more challenging ideas.
Yeah, like his concept of truth, his emphasis on duality, and his love for symbolism.
And how those play out in his stories, which can be pretty wild at times.
But let's be honest, there's a side to Crowley and his work that, well, can be a bit intimidating.
He was a complex figure, to say the least.
Yeah, brilliant, insightful, provocative.
And definitely shrouded in controversy.
And YOGAPUNX doesn't exactly shy away from that complexity.
No, not at all. He really pushes the boundaries.
We've talked about how he loves to play with language, challenge conventional thinking.
But there are parts where he goes really deep into esoteric traditions like, Kabbalah and alchemy.
I have to admit, I got a little lost in those sections.
Yeah, me too. It's like he assumes you already have a PhD in occult symbolism.
Exactly. And even though we're trying to, extract those key insights,
And make it accessible to everyone.
YOGAPUNX is not exactly a beginner's guide to mysticism.
It's definitely more for those who are already familiar with some of the basic concepts.
And who are ready to go deep.
Really deep.
But here's the thing, even if you don't get every single reference,
Or understand all the nuances of his esoteric language.
there's still so much value in engaging with Crowley's work.
Because his ideas about truth, duality, the power of the human will,
They're so thought-provoking.
even if you don't agree with everything he says,
He forces you to think differently.
to see the world from a new perspective.
And that's something I always appreciate, even if it makes my head spin a little.
Yeah, he definitely has that effect on people.
Now, speaking of challenging conventions, there's one aspect of Crowley's work that we haven't really touched on yet.
Oh, you mean his whole thing with magic?
Yeah, and he spells it with a K.
Right, to differentiate it from stage magic, illusions.
So what's the distinction?
Well, for Crowley, magic was about using your will and intention to create change in the world.
So it's about, manifesting your desires.
In a way, yes, but it's more than just wishing for something to happen.
It's about actively shaping your reality.
Yeah. Exactly. He saw it as a science and an art
A way of harnessing the power of the mind.
to achieve specific goals.
Now, this is where things get a bit controversial, right? Because Crowley was often accused of being a black magician.
Someone who uses magic for evil purposes.
And I know that's a label that's been attached to him for a long time.
But it's a gross oversimplification of his beliefs.
So what did he actually believe?
Well, Crowley himself rejected the idea of black magic.
He didn't see it as a legitimate category.
No. He argued that true magic is always about aligning your will with the divine will,
So it's about working in harmony with the forces of the universe.
not trying to manipulate them for selfish gain.
But I have to admit, some of his writings, with all the talk of demons and rituals, can seem a bit dark and unsettling.
We have to remember the context.
He was writing at a time when there was a huge resurgence of interest in the occult.
People were fascinated by the hidden mysteries of the universe.
And Crowley was tapping into that energy.
He was drawing inspiration from all sorts of sources.
Some of which were pretty ancient and esoteric.
So maybe it's not that he was promoting evil.
But that he was exploring those darker aspects of human consciousness.
The shadow side that we often try to ignore or suppress.
And bringing them into the light.
Exactly. He wasn't afraid to delve into those taboo areas.
To explore the full spectrum of human experience.
Both the light and the dark.
And that's something that continues to fascinate people today.
He challenges us to look at ourselves honestly.
Who confront those parts of ourselves that we'd rather not acknowledge.
And maybe that's why he's still so relevant.
Even though he's been gone for almost a century.
His ideas still have the power to shock, provoke, and inspire.
Now, speaking of controversy, there's another aspect of Crowley's work that we need to address.
You mean his views on sexuality?
Yeah, he was a strong advocate for sexual liberation.
He saw sexual energy as a powerful force.
That could be harnessed for spiritual growth.
But he also engaged in practices that would be considered, well, highly taboo today.
And even harm.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that part of his legacy without shying away from it. We can appreciate his insights into consciousness and spirituality
Without condoning his personal behavior.
It's about recognizing that even brilliant individuals can have flaws.
And make mistakes.
And it's a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers.
To engage with ideas thoughtfully.
Even when they come from someone we admire or respect.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We've explored Crowley's ideas about truth, duality, symbolism, magic, sexuality.
Yeah, everything in between.
Been a wild ride.
But before we wrap things up, I think it's worth circling back to one of his core ideas.
The importance of balance.
Yeah, finding that equilibrium between those opposing forces within ourselves.
The light and the shadow.
The masculine and feminine.
The rational and the intuitive.
And we've seen how that idea plays out in so many different ways throughout YOGAPUNX.
In his stories, his symbols, even his more controversial ideas about magic and sexuality.
It's like balance is the key.
The secret code.
To unlocking the mysteries of his work.
And understanding his vision of the spiritual path.
And you know, it's funny because we started out talking about balancing those opposing forces within ourselves.
But I think it's also about finding balance in the world around us.
Between different perspectives, different beliefs, different ways of being.
Especially in today's world, which feels so polarized and divided.
Crowley's emphasis on finding that middle path,
That harmonious integration of all that we are.
offers a powerful antidote to all the extremism and dogma.
That can so easily trap us.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I'm left with this sense of, I don't know, possibility.
Like we've just scratched the surface of something really profound.
And I hope our listeners feel that way too.
That they're inspired to continue exploring.
To keep asking questions.
And to find their own unique path to balance and wholeness.
So thank you for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep those minds curious, those thoughts flowing, and keep diving deep.